Welcome on in, everybody, to the All Aussie Rules Footy podcast. This is episode 72. We're going to be today looking at season grades for every single one of the AFL men's teams from season 2024. This will be looking at pretty much the men's season, nothing after the season, so no off-season stuff, no trades, no free agency, none of that stuff, just the season as it was. Basically looking at what they were expected to do, how they actually went, and some of the numbers behind their season this year. As always, don't forget to podcast every single week. Mondays is AFLW Day. Monday just been was looking at the final round. The week coming up on a Monday, which will be episode 73, we'll be looking at the first week of finals for the AFLW. So check that out. And the second episode each week is Fridays, as this one is AFL Men's. This week we're looking at season grades. Last week we looked at the top 50 players in the AFL. Coming up, we'll be looking at the draft heading into that time of the year, which is only like a month away, roughly, give or take. So yeah, plenty of content. Also other videos on the YouTube channel, so go check them out. Plenty of social medias. Thanks for being here. Let's jump into all the content we've got for you today. First up, we're going alphabetically, so we start with the Adelaide Crows. Pre-season, probably expected to play finals, in all honesty. They just missed out last year. Their team didn't get worse on paper, you wouldn't have thought. But they didn't reach those levels. They end up 15th on the ladder, which is quite disappointing in most people's eyes, I would say. Probably one of the bigger underperforming teams in the AFL this year. Offensively, didn't show much. 12th highest scoring team, 13th in inside 50s, 14th in forward efficiency, so they're all really bad numbers. You look at some of their score sources, they were okay from the defensive half, getting 34.8 points, which is 6th best in the AFL. But the rest of it's not great. Okay from centre bounce scoring as well. Defensively, doesn't read much better. 11th best defence scoring wise, 12th in inside 50s, 13th in forward efficiency. So the numbers across the board just weren't there for Adelaide this year. They were just off the pace, and that's basically why they end up 15th on the ladder and missing finals by, I won't say a huge amount, but they were never in the hunt. They were 4.5 games outside the 8 in the end, so I mean, that's a decent amount, and they're only 3.5 wins from the bottom 3 teams. So, not great. Centre clearance-wise, stoppage clearance-wise, also struggled. So that's kind of where they're at. You'll notice all 3 positionings there, offence, defence, midfield, are all pass marks, technically, like C, B, and then they end up getting an overall grade of D. So they're just like, based on these numbers alone, and then the overall grade is just their overall performance for the year, basically, whether they met their expectations or not, and they missed their expectations. They were 100% going into this season thinking top 8 was a real possibility, and they didn't make it. So I'm happy enough to say that Adelaide were one of the biggest disappointments. I had them in the 8 this year. I thought they were going to go really well. They let me down from the start. They showed some positive signs here and there, but overall, their season was very disappointing, and the numbers on that page pretty much read that, because they did not do that well. As I said, though, offensively, defensive half scoring was really good, 6th best in the AFL, and defensively, from their forward 50 to the opposition score, did really well as well, ranked 4th. So that's a really big positive, how good they are at transitioning the ball from defense to scoring, and then also how good they are at stopping the opposition from transitioning. So that's one positive. But that forward half is really bad. 13th offensively, 15th defensively. So that's a bad sign. So every time you see something good, you see something that counteracts it a bit. Overall, it's a disappointing season. There's no doubt about it. They finished 15th. I've given them a D, and I think that's warranted. We'll move on to the next team in the AFL. It's the Brisbane Lions. It's your premiership team. no surprise here that they get an A+. You just have to give the Premiership team an A+, really. They're expected probably to get top 2. They obviously just missed the grand final in 2020. Well, they played the grand final, just missed the Premiership, losing by 4 points in the grand final. In 2023, they came out, they had a rough start to their season, but they really got the season going. And in the end, it was all good news for them. So, yeah, they're expected to go top 2. Their team didn't get any worse from last year. Obviously, Ashcroft comes back into the team. Losing Coleman week 1 was a really big blow, but they managed to keep going. They lost a few players through injury, and they just kept coming. And they showed some really good signs. Offensively, scored really well, no doubt about it. Third best scoring, second most inside 50s, third best forward efficiency, I should say. Scoring from around the ground was really good. Outside of centre bounces, that's their big weakness, both offensively and defensively. From centre bounces, they concede more than they kick. 10th best offensively and 14th best defensively. So that's one sign where their team struggled a little bit, and they did get found out a little bit late against Sydney in that regard in the grand final once the game was over. But overall, offensively, a really solid year. A rating for me. Defensively, third best scoring wise defensively, third best at inside 50. So they really dominate that inside 50 differential. Second best offensively, third best defensively. Defensive efficiency really solid. Scoring really good, especially from turnovers. Don't concede points from turnovers. That played huge for them in the grand final. It was always going to be a big part of the grand final. Sydney, a really good team from turnovers. Brisbane, not so much. Oh, well, Brisbane defending it really well is what I should say. I don't know where I was going. But defend it really well. Sydney attack it really well. And Brisbane definitely won that battle on the day. Scoring from forward half, teams just can't do it against them. They're the best in the business. A- defensive grade. Their one weakness is probably the midfield. Not really the midfield, but like their centre clearance work is okay. It's not outstanding. Their ruck work, Oscar McInerney's a great ruckman, but I mean he doesn't win that many hitouts. C+ is probably a bit harsh. It probably should have been a B-, maybe even pushing towards a B. They do have a really strong midfield, like Lockie Neal, Ashcroft, Dunkley, McCluggage. All these players go through the midfield and do a really good job. I've probably missed some because it is what it is. But overall, really solid year. Finished first, get the premiership. Obviously didn't finish first in the home and away season. They were fifth on the ladder. But they made the grand final against all odds. They lost their first 3. They looked dead and gone for most of the first half of the season, but they just kept fighting. I think you have to give them an A+ for the season. It was a fantastic effort for them to pull the premiership out of the bag there. So great job from them. Next up, we go to the Carlton Blues. I think most people expected them to finish top 4 this year, and with about 6 to 8 weeks to go, it pretty much looked certain that they would finish top 4. They were second on the ladder, looking really, really good. A few injuries, yes, hit them, but they just fell apart there towards the end. It was kind of an issue for them all year, their defensive ability to stop teams scoring. We'll get to that in a minute, though. Offensively, really solid. Score high, 93.5 points a game, which is the 4th best in the AFL. That is not their issue at all. Getting the ball forward and scoring... Well, getting the ball forward isn't huge. Like, they're only 51.7 inside 50s. They actually concede more inside 50s per game than they get. So that's not their big dominant area, but they do score pretty well, averaging 93.5 points per game. But it's that defensively bit that hurts them. Their defensive efficiency, their defensive scoring, 84.87 points against per game is just too much. You're not going to be winning premierships if you're the 14th worst team defensively in terms of scoring. It's just not going to happen. I mean, you could go back through the record books. It would have never happened in the AFL. I can tell you that right now. So that was a big blow big blow for them. Just their ability to stop other teams scoring. Obviously, their midfield is really, really good. One part of their midfield is really good. Paddy Cripps carries this team. There's no doubt about it. And I mean, he did again this year, and they only managed 8th. He needs some more support in there. He was outstanding. There's not too many other players on their list this year that you could say were outstanding. Kerno had his moments. Harry Mackay started the year really, really well, but didn't manage to hold that form all year long. Walsh came in. He looked really good in his first few games. Maybe not quite up to that peak performance towards the end or even after the first few, maybe. Their spine is really good, probably the best in the AFL. But they just lack that polish, I guess, and maybe it's the belief in the system come crunch time. I don't know. But overall, they get a C. They were expected to finish top 4. They snuck into the 8 by percentage in the end. So they were lucky to make finals. It was an okay season. It's certainly not a positive season when you look at where they were last year, the year before, the belief that they had in their team and where they were with 6 weeks to go. A slightly disappointing finish. I think C's about where they are. You could argue C+. I'm happy giving them a C though. Next up, the reigning premiers, Collingwood Magpies. They were expected to finish high on the ladder, no doubt about it. They're obviously the reigning premiers. You don't expect them to fall off, but just like Geelong did the year before, going from a premiership to missing the 8, Collingwood finished 9th on the ladder, just outside of percentage. I mean, it was a fair amount of percentage off Carlton. They were, in the end, like 7.7% off. So that's quite a lot of points. But in the end, they weren't good enough in the end. That's basically where it's at. You look at it, offensively wasn't too bad. They didn't control the ground all that well this year. Only 49.7 inside 50s, which is a bit down on what you probably need. Their scoring from defensive half was really poor. Their scoring from centre bounce was poor. Yes, they were really good at scoring from the forward half. And pretty good from stoppages overall, but in the end, just didn't get enough scoring. And at the same time, probably conceded a little bit more than they would have liked as well, averaging 84.5 points a game against. Too many inside 50s. Their defensive efficiency was solid. But yeah, just too many points against, maybe not enough points for. Their midfield, pretty solid without being world-breaking. Overall, I think disappointing year. Finish with a D. Yeah, they had plenty of injuries. There's no doubt about it at crucial times. You look at them after the bye, they were sitting 4th on the ladder, or 3rd, 4th, somewhere around there on the ladder. Looking pretty good, but they came out of the bye and lost their first 3 or 4 out of the bye. And that was season done, pretty much. They came home really well. They won 4 of their last 5. But it was too little too late. And I mean, there's two bad stretches that cost them a chance for finals this year. First 3 games, and then those first few weeks out of the bye. So maybe there's something in that coming out of a little break, but maybe it's also just how it worked out. In the end, they have a premiership in the last 2 years, so you can't be too doom and gloom as a Collingwood supporter. But this year, I think you just have to give them a fail because reigning premier, you expect them to do pretty well, and to miss out on finals would certainly be a disappointment. Next up, we go to the Bombers. What to say about these guys? They finished 11th, another year without success in finals. It's happened many years over recent times for the Dons. I'm sure their fans are sick of it. They're a team that doesn't promise much start to the season. Like pre-season, you don't expect too much of them. They then show a bit early season, mid-season, and you think, here we go, here they are, the Dons are back, this is their time, and then they fade away. It's happened 3-4 times in the last 5-6 years, so it's becoming a bit of a problem for them. They conceded too many points this year, 88 points a game against. scored only 82.2. They're a team that dominates field position this year, which is an exact opposite of what they did in 2023, which was more of a, when they were playing well, they were not necessarily a team that dominated field position and dominated the stat sheet. Whereas this year they really did that. They managed to dominate the forward 50 entries pretty much most weeks. 4th best inside 50 team in the AFL offensively and 7th best inside 50 team defensively. Had them one of the better inside 50 differential teams, top 3 or 4 teams in that regard. Their main issue this year, if you look at the forward efficiency offensively, 15th best in the AFL. Not good enough, no doubt about it. They were well below par on creating shots from their inside 50s. Maybe that's their final disposal going in a little bit. It's also maybe a lack of, I'm not going to say ability, because they do have ability in that forward line. Maybe cohesion. Just something isn't working in that forward line. One of the worst teams forward efficiency-wise in the AFL. You look at the other teams that are really low on that list in terms of forward efficiency, and they're all teams that didn't do well this year. Like really didn't do well this year. The bottom 2 teams were North Melbourne, Richmond, 17th and 18th on the ladder. Gold Coast was 16th. Granted, they did okay, but I think they finished like 13th or 14th on the ladder, so they're not high up either. Then it was Essendon in 15th, and then Adelaide, who finished 15th on the ladder, were next. So all the teams that did bad in that finished quite low. Essendon finished above the others, mainly due to their inside 50 domination week in, week out. But you can't get through with a forward efficiency of 43.9%. It's just way too low. Top teams were well over 50%. AFL average is 48.1%. So they're a long way below that. Defensively, also quite bad. 49.4% defensively. So teams almost 1 in 2 times going inside 50 were getting a shot at goal. Had them 15th worst in the AFL in that regard as well. It's just one thing that they need to tidy up, both ends. They need to probably find a way to stop oppositions from creating shots when they go inside 50. A lot of that side of things is because of that field domination that they have. Teams get over the back of them. It's I guess the way it's kind of going to be if you waste your chances. If you dominate the field and you waste your chances, eventually the other team's going to get it past you. You're going to have that press where it might stop it 2-3 times, but if you don't convert one of them, they're going to bounce you back the other way. It's just the way it happens, and that's their main issue in that regard. Offensively, overall, they're okay, not outstanding. Defensively, they're pretty good, not outstanding. Midfield, pretty solid. Zach Merritt's obviously an absolute gun. A couple good young players. Centre clearance-wise, pretty good, except for if you look at the scoring. 4th best offensively scoring from centre bouncers in the AFL, 13 points a game. Sounds good. 16th worst. Or 16th best, sorry, would be the way to say that. Defensively, conceding 13.1. So even though they're plus 1.1 in centre bounces, overall, they're a net loss from scoring from centre bounces. So something to work on there as well. Overall, a C-. They're expected to finish top 10, maybe push for finals. They finish 11th. It's a pass, maybe. I don't know. I think it's the barest minimum pass, if it is a pass. It's a season where 8 weeks to go. Everything looked pretty good for the Dons, but they just didn't finish the season off. And in the end, you got to say, it's just another wasted season for them. Do they look like they've got better for next year? At the moment, I'd say no. But maybe it's all in their head. Maybe it's just tidying up that entry into 50. That last disposal, hitting a target, might be all they need to do to turn their season, to turn those numbers around and really show improvement next year. Next up is another one of the weird teams, I guess, when you look at them. because their numbers are outstanding across the year in so many ways. It's the Fremantle Dockers. They're expected to probably finish top 10 this year. Similar-ish to the Dons, pushing for a potential final spot. And with 4 weeks to go, they looked an absolute lock for finals with a potential chance for a top 4 finish, and then they lose their last 4 games and miss out on finals because of that. It's a weird season for them, that's for sure. Offensively, not the greatest team. B-. Don't score enough, but when they go forward, they look pretty good. They have a solid forward line, couple good tools in there, and no issues really. Defensively, they're really strong. Second best defense in the AFL. Across the board, really good defensively, no doubt about it. Midfield-wise, they're really good as well. Best centre clearance and stoppage clearance team in the game, but they don't convert it into scores or inside 50 domination either, which is weird because you need to be able to, if you're dominating centre clearances and stoppage clearances by as much as they do, you'd want to be scoring a lot more than your opposition from those sources, but they just don't do it for whatever reason. So they get the clearances but don't make use of them, and that's probably one of their major issues this year. They finished 10th on the ladder, half a game outside the 8 after losing their last 4. What more can you say? I give them a C+ because it's about where they were expected, probably. Disappointing end to the season, no doubt about it, but if you look at their season as a whole, they certainly weren't expected to be a dominant team this year, probably mid-table. That's where they finish. So I give them a C+, which is a pass, but it's not something that you're going to write home about, is it? We move on to the next team, which is Geelong Cats. These guys looked like they were going to be an A+ season, and they weren't very close. They were leading a prelim final in the last quarter. With a couple minutes to go in the last quarter, they were leading, and they just fell short. They finished 4th on the ladder, 4th overall after finals. Obviously, finished 3rd during the home and away season. Offensively, a really solid season. You look at the numbers there. 2nd best scoring team, 5th inside 50 count, 8th forward efficiency. They score well from kick-ins. They score well from stoppages, turnovers, defensive half, centre bounces. They score well across the board. Offensively, a really good team. A+. Probably the best in the competition in terms of scoring and creating opportunities forward. Defensively, this is where they kind of get caught out occasionally, especially from forward half scores. The opposition make use of that 38.2 points per game against them. I mean, it's not a huge number, but it's still not... not the forward half, the defensive half. 33.2, that's where I'm looking. 14th best. Concede a bit too much from that source compared to other areas of their defensive scoring. But overall, I mean, they're still ranked 10th, so it's not terrible. It's solid. Probably 2 to 3 points a game more than they would like to be conceding. You look at during the home and away season only without finals, the teams that finished 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 10th, 12th, 14th, all conceded considerably less points per game than Geelong did. So plenty of teams that they finished above conceded less points than Geelong during the home and away season. And in the end, the reason that they did so well is because of their offensive scoring. Especially late in the season, they really found a way to pile on the points against some opposition teams. Look at their qualifying final against Port Adelaide in Adelaide. They absolutely smoked them, and their offense looked perfect. And overall, a pretty solid season. They don't have the most dominant midfield. They don't have the most dominant names in the competition. Certainly, midfield-wise, they don't. But they have some good talent. I mean, Jeremy Cameron's one of the best tall forwards in the competition that does not play like a tall forward. They have some really good smaller, medium-sized forwards. They have some good backmen. Tom Stewart, one of the better running backmen in the competition. A really good season from them. A minus. They missed finals last year. A pass mark, I guess, would have been making finals. Not only did they make finals, they were one game off hosting a qualifying final. They ended up winning the qualifying final anyway. They made it to the prelim and had a really good chance of making that grand final and just slipped up. So really, A minus, A, they're teetering on that point, and I think it was a really good season from them. A lot of people wrote them off before the start of the season, me included. I didn't expect them to do too well, but early on they showed some really good signs and they continued that all the way through. I think they just need to tidy up that defense a little bit, concede a little bit less points, maybe concede a little bit less inside 50s, and I think you'd see a really improved Geelong team that could potentially end up finishing top of the ladder next year. Next up, we have Gold Coast Suns, another team that just, they let you down a lot. They're now 10, 12, whatever seasons it is, 14 seasons into their AFL life, still yet to play finals. In all honesty, that has to be their pass mark each year now. It just has to be make finals. And it just hasn't happened time and time again. They've made some moves in the off-season, but we're not here to talk about that. They're probably expected to finish top 12 coming into the season. I don't think they had high hopes. They showed some really good signs. Their form at home, all the way up until the last few games, was really good. Their form away was horrible all the way up until their last couple games. Overall, offensively, they're solid without being great. They do okay. Scoring-wise, 11th best. Inside 50s is a really, really good area of their game, offensively-wise. 56 inside 50s a game. To only be scoring 83.7 points is not great. They're a team that the ball bounces end-to-end a lot. Like 56 inside 50s for Gold Coast, 53.1 against per game. That's a lot of inside 50s. No doubt about that. That's, I think, the most in the AFL for per game. Certainly would go close. You look, the average for a team is 51.8, so you're looking at an average of 102. They're at 110, so they're well above average in terms of inside 50s per game across both ends, which does suggest that the ball bounces a lot more, and that's probably a lot to do with the fact that they play a lot of football up in Queensland, on the Gold Coast, and in Darwin. Slippery conditions makes the ball bounce end to end a bit more. When it's slippery, when it's slick, not when it's pissing down with rain, obviously. Defensively, they're not great. They're okay. They have some good areas. They have some bad areas, like stoppage work, pretty good. But I don't know what to say about them. They're just a team that promises a little bit without ever taking that next step. That's got to be their pass mark each year going forward, is making the top 8. I've given them a C minus. They're expected around top 12 probably. They finished 13th, so you could argue it's a D. And in all honesty, maybe it is. I've given them a C minus because apparently I'm nice to them this week, but they need to find a way to play finals. As an organisation, they just need to do it. Next up is the GWS Giants. They were expected probably top 6-ish, top 4 maybe, was their prediction at the start of the year. And in all honesty, their season started really, really well. They fell apart a little bit there through the mid-season, brought it right back in that second half of the season. Finished 4th on the ladder, half a game inside the top 4 above Brisbane. But it all fell apart 2 weeks in a row. They were qualifying final, leading Sydney in the last quarter. Couldn't finish them off. And then in the semi-final against Brisbane at home, up by 40 points in the third quarter. And blew the lead and end up losing the match and going out in straight sets. They finished 5th when you include finals. It's a solid season. It's not a great season. B plus maybe if you count the whole season. If you just count finals, it's a fail, no doubt about it. Offensively, score really well. Defensively, they're about average in most regards. Defensively, I think their midfield's probably their main cause of concern. They get smacked in centre clearances. They get smacked in stoppage clearances. And while it doesn't hurt them too bad on the scoreboard from stoppages, just think what they could be doing if they were winning more clearances, because they don't win the territory battle either. They're -4 inside 50s per game, which is a massive amount for a team that played finals and finished top 4 to be giving up 4 inside 50s more than you're getting per game. Is a massive margin and really makes it hard to play finals. There's only 4 teams below them that have a worse inside 50 differential in the AFL. 3 of them were the bottom 3 teams in West Coast, Richmond and North Melbourne, and then next was Melbourne, and then it was GWS. So they were not good at the territory battle this year, and they still finished 4th on the ladder. So I think if they can find a way to win that territory battle a bit better this year, or next year, 2025, they'll go a long way to seeing them improve to maybe a top 2 team. Their issue is they've lost some players. Yes, they have a lot of depth, but they've got a lot of work to do. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out for them, whether they can really develop maybe that clearance game, or at least their ability to not be conceding so many inside 50s, because you're going to find it hard to be winning games when you're giving up 4 extra inside 50s every single week. It's going to bite you eventually. Oh, by the way, I don't know if I said it or not, but B plus for them. I feel like that's a fair enough reasoning for them for the year, in my eyes. Next up, we have the biggest surprise packet of 2024. Most people had them bottom 4 pre-season. After 5-6 weeks, everybody had them probably bottom 2. And then all of a sudden their season turned around and their numbers are outstanding. Offensively, they don't have big names forward. I mean, Gunston, Brewster, all-time players that have been around forever, but overall, they don't have dominant forward players. Dylan Moore had an outstanding season, yes, but still, there's no dominant tall forwards. There's no, they're just a team that just gets it done. 90.4 points per game offensively is really good, especially if you take out the first 6 weeks. That goes up close to 100 per game. They score well across the board. Defensively, number 1 is crazy. The fact that they were only conceding 76 points per game, only gave up 47.5 inside 50s a game. It's crazy what the numbers that these guys did across the season. I think overall best defensive team in the competition this year goes to Hawthorn. Who would have seen that coming at the start of the year or even midway through the year? Their second half of the year was incredible, outstanding effort. Their midfield, no massive names in that either. Jai Newcomb had a great season. A couple others stood up. Well, they all stood up in the end, but they just don't have big names, but they just keep getting the job done this year. And they'll be stoked. Had them finishing bottom 4. They got into the 8 reasonably comfortably in the end. They finished 7th on the ladder, but they were a game and a lot of percentage ahead of 9th, so reasonably comfortably there. And they won their first final against the Doggies, which was a huge win for them. And in all honesty, unlucky not to win a semi-final. I was going for Port Adelaide against them, and I'm not going to beat around the bush, and Port Adelaide did win it, but Hawthorn well and truly could argue that they were the better team that night. Both teams certainly had their chances, and in the end, 6th after finals, 8th A+, has to be an A+. A team that was expected to do nothing and was a kick away from going into a prelim final against, granted, a team that had been really good all year in Sydney, but still, a season that they won't forget. There's no doubt about it. They came from nowhere and had a really good finish. They will be hoping that they can do that again next year. Finishing 7th on the ladder in the home and away season is a good spot for them to finish because it puts them in that second 6. Top 6 obviously are in the top tier, next 6 are in the second tier, and the bottom 6 are in the third tier when it comes to scheduling for next year. So they do get a little bit of luck with that in the end, but it is what it is. Well done to the Hawks, great season, A+. One of only 2 teams this year to get the A+ grade. Next up, we have the Melbourne Demons. They were expected to finish top 4. They had a rough season. They ended up with 11 wins, 12 losses, so 2 wins outside the 8. And with 6 weeks to go, they were a chance still to make finals. They beat Essendon in like round 18 or 19 or somewhere around there, and looked like they were a genuine chance to play finals football. And then it kind of just fell apart again. I mean, they were missing Petrarca, their best player, arguably their best player. Obviously, Max Gawn's also in that argument. But Petrarca was having a huge season up until mid-season when he got injured. So that obviously hurt them. Overall, though, their numbers across the board were quite disappointing, especially offensively. 14th best scoring team in the AFL. They just weren't any good at that. Inside 50s were terrible. 14th best offensively and defensively. Defensively, they played pretty well, in all honesty. Their defensive efficiency was one of the best in the AFL. Third. Scoring against them was pretty good. 78.8 points per game is pretty solid, but they just couldn't score this year. Whether it was too defensive-minded across the board, whether it was Petrarca going down and just costing them too much, they just couldn't get it going. There's no doubt about it. They'll want to bounce back. In all honesty, they're capable next year. They haven't lost a huge amount. They've lost a little bit, but not a huge amount. But in the end, this year was definitely a disappointment. Top 4 maybe expected at the start of the year. To finish 14th is disappointing. At worst, you would have been expecting them to go top 8. Even with 6-7 weeks to go, you're still thinking they have a chance, but they couldn't finish their season off. They finished 14th, and I think you have to give them a D. Next up, we have the 17th placed North Melbourne Kangaroos. It's been a rough few years for them, and what can you say about them? 18th highest scoring team in the competition, also the worst defensively scoring team in the competition by quite a way in both regards. Overall for the year, scored 89 points less than any other team, and defensively conceded... Oh no, they scored more points, than some teams. They're 16th ranked scoring, so let's not doom and gloom them that bad. They're 16th scoring, and then they're 18th defensively, but defensively by a long way. Yeah, it was a rough season for them. Their scoring would have been 18th had they not been so accurate in front of goal. Their forward efficiency is horrible. Their inside 50s is horrible. But they did kick straight. They're the most accurate team in the competition in front of goal this year. And just as well they were, because otherwise their season would have been a lot worse. They end up 3 wins. They don't finish wooden spoons, so they finish 17th on the ladder. Offensively, pretty average. Defensively, they were pretty average. And, I mean, they've got some good names, some really good young talent coming through. But overall, I've given them a C, which I think that's even a push, isn't it, really? I mean, they were expected to finish bottom 4. C, maybe a C minus. They would have needed 5 wins to get to a B. And, I mean, they weren't that far from 5 wins. They got 3 and they lost 2 games by less than a kick. But at the end of the day, they're just not there yet. they need to find a way to really get this trajectory going up, because at the moment it's still doom and gloom for them. They've got a lot of good young talent, but the numbers just aren't there, and they're going to have to improve across the board, which is possible. Hawthorn did it, so maybe another team can as well. But it was a rough season for them. Next up, we have Port Adelaide. They finished this home and away season second on the ladder, just a game and a percentage behind Sydney. Had one of the most miraculous games of the season, where they won against the almost undefeated Sydney team by 119 or 117 points or whatever it was. Home and away season, really good. There were calls for sacking Ken Hinkley at one point, but you ignore that. 16 wins, 7 losses, second on the ladder. Things were looking good. Finals-wise, though, it wasn't great for them, was it? They end up getting smacked, really. Week 1 of the finals by Geelong. They fought back, just got over the line against the Hawks, but then they got blown away by the Swans again in the prelim. Bit of a disappointing season, I guess, in a way. They're expected probably top 6, maybe pushing top 4. They managed to get second, which I think home and away season's definite pass for them. Finals, probably a little disappointing. When you finish second on the ladder, you kind of want to make the grand final. They didn't manage to do that, so it's, in the end, a little bit of a disappointing end. Offensively, they're not spectacular. Let's not beat around the bush. They're nowhere near one of the better teams offensively. Some areas they're really good, like their forward efficiency, second best in the competition. But where they come alive is defensively. They do manage to strangle teams. They did it a lot throughout the season. And, I mean, what are they? 8th best in defensive scoring. But the top 8 are all really quite close. Outside of, all 8 of them are pretty much level. Like, there's only 20-odd points across the season between them, so not much before the teams after 8th start to drop. But yeah, so defensively really good. Their midfield's really strong across the board. A+ for their midfield, A- for the defence, maybe A could be argued. And then offensively, that's their disappointing part. B, I give them an A- for the season, just because, I mean, they weren't expected to be definite top 3, and they finished second on the home and away season, made a prelim. So I think A- is a fair enough assessment in my eyes. Next up, we have the Wooden Spooners, Richmond Tigers. We're not going to talk too long about these guys, but their season was derailed by injuries early. They looked okay in the first few weeks. Carlton in round 1 could have been a win. They just failed to execute, especially late. They beat Sydney in round 3. They were 30 points up against St Kilda in round 4 before losing that one. And then injuries started to hit. And injuries really hit them hard, really quickly. It was week in, week out. They were losing more players than they were getting back for weeks. And that cost them. And then it cost them momentum, and then it just kind of snowballed from there. And confidence is a huge thing in AFL these days. Worst offensively team, second worst defensively. Giving up 10 inside 50s per game. Just across the board, just really, really struggled. There's not too much to read about there. Their midfield's okay. It's probably their only good part of their ground. Toby Nankervis is a really good ruckman. They've got a couple good midfielders, but, I mean, they've cleared out stocks this year, so who knows what's going to be on the cards for them next year. I think they were expected to finish bottom 6, probably not expected to get the wooden spoon at the start of the year. So, disappointing for them, no doubt about it. A definite fail of a season. D. I'm happy giving them a D. I think that's what they deserve. It's unlucky because, I mean, injuries played a major part in that, but every team has them. I mean, you can't control the luck, can you? St Kilda probably expected to finish top 10, in all honesty. They played finals last year and missed it this year, finished 12. So overall, a slight disappointment there. But their end of the season was really positive, no doubt about it. They won a lot of games in the second half of the year. They were down in like 14th, 15th most of the year, up until that run towards the end of the year. They'll be kicking themselves for the start of the year. They're just a team that plays in low-scoring games week in, week out, and, I mean, look at it. 76 points for, which is well below the AFL average, and only 76.4 points a game against. So they're a team that certainly plays in low-scoring games. They knuckle down and just play low-scoring games. It's not always the most exciting football to watch, but their second half of the season was very good. There's no doubt about it. So defensively, they're probably in the top few teams in the competition across the board. Offensively, they're in the bottom 5. I'm quite confident in saying that. They've got some good players around. Ruckman, Roland Marshall had a great season. But overall, C-. I think it's not a complete fail because they weren't expected to be top 6 or 7 or 8, but certainly would have hoped to had a better start to the year, especially when they beat Collingwood in round 2. Things would have been looking pretty good for them internally. They would have been hoping from that point that they could kick on their season, but it kind of fell apart a little bit really early and then just snowballed for the first half of the year. They came out of the bye really well, but it was kind of all over for them from already, and they had too much work to do to come back. Next up, we have Sydney Swans. They lost the grand final, as everybody knows. Coming into the season, probably expected to finish top 4, but internally probably hoping for a premiership, in all honesty. And that's the way it looked like going all year. Certainly the first 15, 16 weeks, they were the clear standout team. Offensively, scored the most points this year. Defensively, 6th best. The numbers look really good. Offensively, probably top 2 or 3 team in the competition. Defensively, probably top 5 or 6 team in the competition. Midfield-wise, number 1 team in the competition this year. Between Heaney, Warner, Gordon, just dominant. Brodie Grundy added a lot to their midfield as well. In the end, they finished 2nd due to not winning the grand final, so that's got to be disappointing if you look at it in that sense. From like any point during the season, it's probably a fail of a year for them. But if you look at it from the start of the year, I'm happy to give them an A. They were clearly a top 4 team for the year. They were clearly, arguably, one of the best 2 or 3 teams almost every week this year, outside of that 3 or 4 weeks towards rounds 15 to 19-ish. You take out those weeks and they were by far the best team this year. They'll be disappointed, no doubt about it, that they didn't win a premiership, and in the end, that's what teams are playing for. But only one team can win it. You can't fail every team that doesn't win the premiership. So I'm happy to say they get an A. They're the 2nd best team this year. They will be expected, their pre-season expectations for next year has to be grand final appearance. No doubt about it. Well, actually, it probably needs to be premiership. That's the only way they can make up for losing this year. They need to do what Brisbane did the year before. Next up, we go to West Coast. They finished 16th on the ladder. They showed some okay signs this year. They had some bad weeks where they looked atrocious. They had some good weeks where they looked quite good. 5 wins. It's probably a pass, to be honest. They were expected to finish bottom 4. They did finish bottom 4. They finished 3rd bottom. But 5 wins is a decent amount. Offensively, don't score much. Defensively, concede too much. The numbers across the board don't look good there. I've given them a D, because they're basically in the bottom three in every category. It's not good reading when you look at the numbers because some of their games are atrocious this year. They look like witches' hats some weeks. But overall, they won 5 games. They finished 16th on the ladder. Finished better off than Kangaroos and Richmond. In fact, had as many wins as those two teams combined. So that's a positive for them. A long way off 15th, in all honesty. They're 3.5 games behind Adelaide, who are the position above them, but a lot of percentage. So West Coast's percentage was 68, which is better than the two teams below them. But Adelaide, who were 15th on the ladder, had a percentage of 99. So their percentage was 30 off the team above them on the ladder, which is a massive margin. That equates to something like 700 points throughout a season, which is a huge, huge number. Overall, C- because they did improve. They did improve. There's no doubt about it. Do they have a lot more improvement to go? Yes. Will we see that next year? I can't be certain, but they certainly showed improvement. Next year, their pass-fail will probably be 8 wins. They have to get well over 5. I think 8 at a minimum needs to be what they aim for next year. Final team is the Bulldogs. Numbers-wise, they look the best team in the competition a lot of the time this year. But they they didn't sneak into the finals. They finished the season really strong, which gave them 6th on the ladder, which was only a game and percentage inside the 8. 14 wins though throughout that, but to lose an elimination final is a bit disappointing. I gave them a B- mainly just due to the fact that, they weren't guaranteed to be a top 8 team this year, and with 6-7 weeks to go, they were still a couple games outside the 8. So they finished really well. They made it to finals. Bit disappointing there, but they're an enigma of a team, in my opinion. The team that looks good on the sheet, numbers-wise, they look by far like they should be a top 2 team in the AFL. 5th best offense, 5th best defense, number 1 inside 50 team, both offensively and defensively. Their forward efficiency is outstanding, 4th best. They score a lot of points. They do a lot of things right. They have a dominant midfield that gets plus 3.5 clearances a game. They have Bontempelli, the best player in the competition. They also added Treloar in a career best year this year. Ed Richards, who dominated compared to his previous numbers, into that midfield. And yet, they only just made it to finals, and they bummed out in week 1 of the finals. So, overall, it's not a great season for them. I've given them a B+ there. Maybe it's a C+. I've given them a B-, sorry. Maybe it's actually a C+. Debatably, it could be. Overall, their numbers look outstanding. But in the end, it's all about wins and losses. And they finish about where they probably should have been. But you've got to think that for the talent they have on their list at the moment, it's a bit disappointing that this team never makes top 4. That's the doggies, though. That's the doggies. That's every team done. All 18 teams graded. I feel like I've talked, and I probably have, to be honest. But I do appreciate you for being here. Jump in the comments below. Let me know what you graded your team, where I went right, where I went wrong. Let me know. I'm interested in all your input. As I mentioned at the start, we've got another podcast going live on Monday, which will be AFLW Week 10 wrap plus finals Week 1 preview. It's all coming up to a big conclusion in the AFLW. It's so make sure you tune in for that. Plenty more men's content coming up over the coming weeks with draft content and the like. Thanks for tuning in. Subscribe, smash that subscribe button. Let's get that number up. Keep ticking her along. Appreciate you for being here. I'm Jay. This is All Aussie Rules. This was episode 72. Catch us on the next one.